Good evening. So I moved from California to Williamsburg, Virginia. And in California, despite the fact that you think of people as being kind of, woo, out there really nobody believes in ghosts. But in Virginia, everybody does. And when I first got to Williamsburg, I went to a party and everyone was talking about ghosts. And I remember a guy named Jeff saying that he'd gone out duck hunting. And it was early, early morning, the sun hadn't yet come up. And as he watched and the sky got gray and grew lighter and lighter, he could see out on the water a flock of ducks. But it was the oddest thing because the ducks were all in even rows. And as he watched, those ducks glided closer and closer to the shore. And then they began to rise up out of the water. And they weren't ducks at all. They were the three-cornered hats of Revolutionary War soldiers who had drowned in the Chesapeake Bay. And then I started hearing about Edgewood Plantation, which is over in Charles City County. And people were talking about how at Edgewood, everything goes along fine for 10, 15, 20 years. But every now and then, all the windows blow out. And then my future husband got a job kind of tending the horses at Westover Plantation on the James. Now, at Westover Plantation, there was a tragic death. William Byrd III, who had owned Westover, had an affair. His mother intensely disliked his wife. And so one day, his mother told his wife, Mary, that he'd been having an affair. And if she wanted the proof, all she had to do was go up to the third floor. And there was a high boy, one of those dressers that's kind of in two layers. Now, Mary was a very petite woman. And her mother-in-law told her there were letters that would prove the affair up in the top drawer. So Mary pulled out the bottom drawer to step up on it, to reach into the top drawer, and pulled that high boy up over onto herself. People talk about that death. But then I discovered that I had several really good friends, rational people who'd had very strange experiences out there at Westover. There was Suzanne, who was at Westover with her husband when she heard maniacal laughter coming from the third floor. Maybe it was the mother-in-law finding her dead daughter-in-law. Bunny was out there with her husband Jennings, and they were walking through the formal garden, and when they came to the obelisk that is a monument to William Byrd III, all of a sudden both of them at the same moment took off running back for the parking lot because both of them were overcome with fear, horror, dread, all at the same moment. And then I found out that Marion was out there with her aunt and her niece, and they were all on different parts of the property when simultaneously on different parts of the property, all three of them were overcome with fear, horror, and dread and met as they had run into the parking lot to escape at the same time. And that's now where Terry was living. And I remember walking around on the grounds, and it just felt creepy. But he didn't want to know anything about the stories I'd heard because he had to live there. Now, by this time I was working at Colonial Williamsburg, where we portray life in the years right before the American Revolution. People dress in 18th century style clothes, and 88 of the structures there in town have been standing since before the Revolution. And people began talking about their experiences in the buildings. Rod was there one night for lantern tours. He had lit the lanterns in the kitchen of the George Wythe house. It was a cold, cold night. So all the windows, all the doors were closed. There wasn't a breeze at all. And the lanterns have glass around the candles. But all of a sudden, at the same time, every candle flame laid sideways. Lori was downstairs getting ready to tell stories. She was below the parlor, and she heard women's footsteps. She could tell because she could hear the heels rearranging all of the furniture in the room, in the parlor, and she thought, goodness, they must be having a really large group or something, because usually they don't have to rearrange the furniture. But when she went upstairs, the attendant was actually sitting outside, and she said, why were you moving the furniture around? And the attendant said, I wasn't moving the furniture. And sure enough, everything was where it usually was, so Lori went back downstairs, and then again, she heard the footsteps and she heard chairs being dragged around the room. And when she went back upstairs, the attendant was still outside. She said, I haven't moved a thing. At the Peyton Randolph house, everybody knows. When you go in the morning and unlock the building, you say, hello, good morning, I'm here, I'm just opening up. And when you leave at night, you say goodbye, see you tomorrow. Because everybody knows that there is something in that house. People were still talking when I arrived about the security guard who had been shoved down the stairs by an invisible hand. And one day when I was standing in the Red Oak chamber, someone walked in and began describing how her friend had seen a ghost, a man with a sword who had walked across that other room, and how his sword had gone through the back splats of the chair when he sat down. Mike showed up at the public jail one morning. This was just 5 years ago, maybe. And when he unlocked the door, he said, good morning, Mr. Pelham. That's the jail keeper. And when he turned back around to lock the door behind him so he could start opening the blinds and opening the other doors, and he heard something, and he turned around and there was a penny rolling around on the floor. And he thought, well, that's odd. So he picked up that penny and put it in his pocket. And when he turned back to the door, he heard something else and turned back around. Another penny rolling in circles. 27 times he turned around to find pennies rolling on the floor. And finally he said, Mr. Pelham, if you're going to throw money at me, at least throw me an 18th century half penny. And a penny hit him in the chest. Around the corner is the Powell house. Christy worked there. She'd worked there for years. And one day she had cousins that had come into town. They brought her little nephew, second cousin, whatever. And he'd gone off riding his bike, and when he came back, he was so excited, and he started telling her about the nice lady that had waved to him from the upstairs balcony of that house where she works. And she said, there's no upstairs balcony. And she said, yeah, there is. There was a lady in a rocking chair. She was waving. Well, 3 years later, when Christy was going through the photos in the archives, she found a picture of the Powell house before it had been restored. And in the picture, there's a balcony, and there's an old lady sitting on that balcony. Turning the corner is the Chisel Bucktrout house. Now, Colonel Chisel killed a man in a bar fight. He was a very wealthy man, so he was let go on bond and got to go home. Most people would have stayed in the public jail. But he went home to his house around the corner where he hanged himself. That's now a guest house. People coming to Williamsburg can stay in the Chisel Bucktrout house, and room 3031, it's not uncommon to get locked in the bathroom. You can be locked in the bathroom 10, 15, 20 minutes. Can't get out, and all of a sudden the door opens just fine. People who stay in that room go to sleep with their luggage on one side of the room and wake up with the luggage on the other side of the room. They leave for the day, and when they come back, ladies find their makeup dumped out into the sink, or they find all of the electric chargers for their equipment in the sink. But I worked at the Mary Dickinson shop. And the Mary Dickinson shop, we used to sell a lot of hats. And after a while, you get to know the sounds when hat boxes are being thrown around upstairs. It's a very distinctive sound, these great big boxes full of straw hats. We used to hear hat boxes getting thrown around a lot upstairs when there was no one there. But one night, my manager, Nancy, went upstairs to make sure that everything was locked up. It was the end of the day. Virgie was counting the money in her drawer when Nancy went upstairs. And she checked, and everything was just as it should be. But all of a sudden, she heard two little girls whispering and giggling. Now, upstairs, there's a door at the top of the stairs, another door at the bottom of the stairs in the counting room where Virgie was, and 2 more steps below. When Nancy heard those little girls giggling, she ran through the door at the top of the stairs, ran down the stairs as fast as she could, ran through the door at the bottom of the stairs, closed the door, sat down on the steps and said, "Oh my gosh, Virgie, I just heard laughing and giggling upstairs." And then she heard the door at the top of the stairs open and heard little feet tripping down the stairs that stopped right behind the door behind her. And she jumped up and she whipped open the door, and there was nothing there. When I moved to Virginia from California, I didn't believe in ghosts. I'm a believer now. Thank you.